To anyone who has ordered a mail order bride, what was it like and what happened? I dated a girl whose dad had a mail order bride. It took them 2 months to figure out why she wasn't learning anything from her English classes. Turns out the school had messed up and put her in German. You can't make this it up. I used to work retail with a Filipino woman who was a mail order bride. She was a tiny little thing, around 35 years old, and her husband was a very large, stocky white man around 50-55. I thought it was very weird when she first told me, but when I met him and saw them together, it actually seemed like a nice fit. He was always coming into the store to bring her lunch or to buy her things, and pick her up from work on his motor scooter. It was pretty cute watching them ride it together. It seemed like he really enjoyed spoiling her, and when she talked about him, she seemed very much in love with him. It didn't appear that he was particularly wealthy or anything, but he treated her very well and they seemed very happy. Just before I left that job, she had just became pregnant with their first child. I think an old high school buddy of mine did this. Went off to college on the West Coast. Came back with a Thai wife who barely spoke any English. He spoke a bit of Thai, but not much. They were together for about 3 years. Then she just up and disappeared one morning, leaving their son behind. Not sure what happened to her. He claimed she went back to see her family. He joked that he killed her. He may have killed her though. My dad has a mail order bride. It feels so ducking weird typing that out. Only a handful of people know about it. He met her on a website, flew over to visit, was married by the time he got back, and now I have a half sister. Although my parents were always too ashamed to admit this to anyone but myself and my sister, my mom was a mail order bride about 23-24 years ago. This was before all the online companies that do this. So my father had to find my mother in a sort of magazine catalog of Filipino women. He sent her letters, and she replied. Over the course of a year, they finally met and my mom moved to my dad's tiny hometown, got married, and they had 2 daughters together, one being myself. They were both looking for a better life, and someone who would treat them better than past partners had, and they both got that. Plus it turns out they both have the travel bug, so now they're retired, living a nomadic life traveling the globe, and they got more than they ever hoped for. Sure, I've always known there were some serious cultural differences between my parents that they've never been able to fully reconcile. My mom, being from a very traditional village in northern Philippines, has a hard time understanding a lot of North American norms and beliefs, and they butt heads over a lot of small things. These cultural clashes have taught me so much though, and their collective love of travel and culture has inspired me to study anthropology and travel around the globe. I can't imagine having lived in a home where we didn't eat bacon and rice, pancit and steak, or purple Uber birthday cakes on a regular basis. TLDR, my mom was a mail order bride, resulting in a long-term happy marriage between my parents and purple birthday cake for me. D. My dad had one a few years back. He met her online and flew out to get her after a while. She was a shut-in and was legitimately afraid of me because she thought I was smoking pot. Funny thing was that I had never smoked weed at the time. I was 17. It was a weird dynamic. If I was home she stayed in her room, unless I had been in my room for an extended period and she deemed it safe to get food from the kitchen. My room was in the basement just for clarification. The few times we crossed paths she would see me, gasp and then run to her room. My dad never saw this as a problem. He basically catered to her every want and need. Also I should mention he was 56 and she was 29. A year later I moved out. Since then she has attacked him on 2 occasions and had him arrested. Eventually he sent her back. Or maybe she left, I don't know. I no longer speak to my father, so that's the extent of my knowledge. This weird, creepy friend of a friend married one. He was a Desert Storm vet with PTSD and maybe mild autism. We used to go shooting with him sometimes because we were extremely bad at making life decisions. Once, he showed up at my friend's house and no one was home. So he let himself in and sat quietly in the living room with the lights off for several hours until we got back. Gave us a hell of a scare. Anyhow, he met this stunning Ukrainian woman on one of those mail order bride sites and sort of dropped off the map. A couple years later I ran into him at a thrift store and he told me about how they're both bounty hunters now. I doubt he's a Redditor. So here's my dad's friend's story as my dad tells it and as I've observed. She's Asian and he paid for her to go to school to become a pharmacist and they live in a newly built house and raise chickens. She was very adamant about the chickens. One of my mom's friends married a mail order bride from the Philippines about 10 years ago. I spent New Year's at their house 2 years ago and let me tell you it's even creepier in person than you ever dreamed it could be. He's approaching 80 by now and she's mid-30s. He just hangs off of her, insisting on PDA at every opportunity. I think she's remarkably well adjusted given the circumstance. Over the years she's saved enough money to bring over several family members, which I'm sure is some welcome solace. My girlfriend and I were recently eating at a restaurant in Las Vegas seated right next to another couple. The lady was a 30-something Asian woman and the guy was a 50-year-old American man. They spent about 5 straight minutes with the waiter trying to order food for the woman who didn't seem to understand they were in a place that served food. Then, once they did order, she leaned in and told the guy something we couldn't quite hear. He got up immediately and left for a bit. In his absence the woman tried to ask for something from the waiter in super beyond broken English. Waiter couldn't understand and she just stopped talking and stared straight ahead. The guy eventually got back and put a box on Tampax on the table next to her and said very loudly, "Because I take care of my baby." She smiled and grabbed the box and started opening it right at the table. Took out a tampon, opened up the plastic, opened the tampon and stared at the guy with a super confused look. The guy turned pale and started asking her things like, "Do you not use those? Do you use pads? Do you want me to find you some pads? For your period? Your period? You're on your period right now. Yes. The blood. Yes dear. That's your period." All the while the woman was like repeating what he was saying super loudly. Meanwhile I'm eating spaghetti like a foot away from the guy, almost shoulder to shoulder with him. They eventually left without eating or paying or saying anything. It was one of the most bizarre things I have ever seen and I now completely assume without any other kind of supporting evidence that she was a mail order bride. Some guy in my small hometown married a Filipino mail order bride. Guy was kind of a creep and it didn't last. She left him and got a minimum wage job at a fisheries shop, grilling work for no money. She cried when she got her first paycheck. She couldn't believe how much money it was. Really put my quality of life into perspective. I'm pretty rich for a poor person and I occasionally remember this tidbit when I lose my way. I had a friend of a friend who did it. He was an unappealing neckbeard with a terrible personality. He got a truly gorgeous Vietnamese girl through some bride-to-order agency who was really sweet and seriously a catch. The girl left him as soon as she legally could, having gained citizenship. Honestly, I think the deal worked out really well for both of them. I also think if the guy was worthy of her, or even just a sweet guy, she would have stayed. My brother up and went to Russia a few years back to visit a girl he had met online. Only stayed about 4 days, which made it an expensive and short visit, but probably a good idea if you're not sure what's going to happen when you actually meet. Several months later she came to visit us and surprise, they're engaged. My mom was not expecting this. I was. You don't bring over a girl from another country and introduce her to your family because you're just friends. They spent the next couple months getting the paperwork organized and then she moves to the US and then 2 months later they got married. Had their buddy officiate at a pretty little ceremony at the lake. Just immediate family. She and my brother are around the same age and have similar interests and they seem really happy together. Sis-in-law is going to school and I now have a niece. Maybe it was mail order. Maybe they stumbled across each other and Reddit. Don't know. Don't really care. They're happy and that's all that matters. My friend's dad got one and she flew back a week after she got to the States. I always thought he was creepy, but he must have been a maniac for her to voluntarily go back to Thailand after a week. I used to work filling propane tanks. I was filling one for this Russian lady one day and she looks at me. Are you single? No. Why? Too bad, I have friend in Russia perfect for you. You're pretty sure she was going to try and hook me up with a mail order bride, or someone trying to get their green card. One of my uncles, who is Filipino, convinced one of his white co-workers to marry his 28-year-old niece who was still living in the Philippines at the time. The guy was at least 20 years older than her. The relationship was really rocky the first 2 years. She hated him, basically, but she stuck with the relationship. Got him to go church and they were more or less together. About 10 years into the marriage, the guy needed a kidney transplant. Months pass. He can't work anymore and she's spending all her free time outside of work taking care of him at the hospital while he's waiting for a kidney. I visited one time while he was in the hospital and she broke down telling my other relatives and me how much she loved him and she didn't want to lose him. The doctors finally give him like less than 3 months to live if he doesn't get a kidney, and after a month and a half later, he got the kidney, recovered and went back to work within a year's time. At a family get together he bragged to everyone including me about how amazing he feels and how much he thought he was dead and that he was blessed to have a new lease on life. Then a few months later I get call from him saying that he's met someone online and that he still considers me family. In shock, I tell him I'm busy and then called my aunt, who then explained to me he found a 21-year-old single Filipina mom from Cebu and already filed divorce papers against my uncle's niece, who was almost 40 at the time. My friend Richard has a mail order bride from the Philippines. He's a scruffy redneck long haul trucker from West Virginia. She's tiny, slender, and 10 years his junior. At first she cooked, cleaned, and kept his bed warm, but after a few years she told him she wanted an education. He put in a ton of overtime and saved up enough to put her through college. She's a physician's assistant now and makes more money than he ever has. But she still makes him dinner and makes a point of always being waiting at the door when he gets back from a long haul. They've been together for 20 years now and it's a joy to see them together. My friend Candid. She was Russian. She had brain cancer and died 2 years after they got married. My landlord senior year had a mail order bride. She spoke zero English but he just had her kind of follow him everywhere. Helped his rich guy vibe. He also had cameras in our apartment. He knew about every guy I'd had over and told my parents, who told me. They already knew from me, so it was a power play by him. Threatened a lawsuit and got the hell out. My father's cousin brought back a Vietnamese wife from the war. I believe she was a prostitute. He's long since passed. But at the rare gathering on that side of the family, that woman is a ducking riot. She hugs everyone and loudly proclaims how good it is to see us and is super enthusiastic about everything. She shares no blood with any of us and she is the happiest person to see every single family member. It was pretty damn funny learning her story after the fact. I wish I could order one of these brides from somewhere closer like Minnesota. My great grandmother was a mail order bride. A man in central Louisiana had been widowed and wanted someone to raise his kids and help out on the farm. This was 1935ish. My great grandmother saw the ad in Kentucky and said she'd do it. However, she neglected to tell him she'd be bringing 4 kids with her. I guess when she got here, the guy was oh well, that's cool, and allowed her and the kids to stay. My grandmother was the only one to stay down here, though. The other kids went back to Indiana when they were old enough. My dad's co-worker got one from Vietnam. He went on a love vacation or whatever they call it. They got married shortly thereafter and she moved to the US. Then, after 3 months in the US, she called the cops on him, saying he was abusing her. He got kicked out of his own house. She divorced him, and he lost a bunch of assets to her. A couple years later, I found out he married another one from a different country, thinking he'd have better luck. IDK what happened with that one for sure, but I know it didn't last either. Buckle up. This one's weird. Grandfather had a mail order bride from the Philippines. They got married within a couple of weeks. She made us popsicles made from guacamole. We got them a dog named Sasha. She thought we said Tasha and now its name is Tasha. Married like 2 years. She took the dog's husband and daughter, pretty boy and pretty girl, and fled the state after she got her driver's license. IDK how my grandfather got the dogs back.